Gaffanet's education, to put it mildly, was really nothing but one big mess for the first 100 and almost 50 years of its existence. I think in 1774, that's 12 years before the town even had a magistrate, even that it was here, the first pleas went to the government. Said, we need three things. We need a magistrate, we need a predikant, and we need a teacher. Those three notes echoed all through the decades as we went along, always for those. They got their Landros, 1786. They got their predikant 6 years later, in 1792. And then they waited. Because the onderwyser het nie gekom nie, het nog nie gekom nie. So it was a long, serious wait for the teachers. But the people were clamoring for it. Mostly Dutch people, Dutch-speaking people, Afrikaner people, because they needed education to get into their church membership. Om gekatekiseer te word, moes jy kon lees en skryf. Okay? So that's the problem. So they needed teachers. But they didn't really, many of the people didn't really look much beyond that. They simply needed teachers to eventually get your church membership, and then you're okay. Then you don't need so much more, but like Paul Kruger, ek het die Bybel en is al wat ek lees. So, but the point is, there was a real lack in education until the church stepped in. 1798, they opened the first modest little school. We're not too sure where it was, but I think it may have been the old, or where the municipal library is today, the modern library right here. And they carried on, but we couldn't really expect much to happen, and I don't want to turn this into a long history lesson, but from about 1780 to about 1810, for those 30 years, the government, daar ver, in Cape Town and in Europe, was also a big mess. I mean, we went from a Dutch rule in 1795 to a British rule for about 8 years or so, but that wasn't really a rule to be the government. It was just a placeholding to keep it out of French hands. Then the Dutch came back, but the Dutch who came back were very different from the Dutch who left. The Dutch who left was a bankrupt VOC. The Dutch who came back was a bunch of Republicans, not monarchists. Willem of Oranje was sitting in England at the time. It was completely a different mindset from the revolution, so everything was so different. And a bare 3 years later, the British were back again. Same Brits, fortunately. But they didn't do much until about 1814, when I think the Convention of London, where they officially finally sorted out in Europe who is going to get the Cape. And England got the Cape, and the Dutch stepped away from the Cape. So in all those years, nothing happened education-wise, or very little, except for the church with their little kerkie across the road here. Lord Charles Somerset arrived somewhere, Cradock before him, and they said we have to anglicize this whole business. We can't be a British colony now, a proper British colony. And at that point, only 1 in 8, that is what was claimed, 1 in 8 people living in the Cape Colony could read and write English. 7 out of 8 could not even understand English. Now, that was the argument that was put up to have Dutch continued. On the other hand, Somerset retaliated. He said, well, there's only 30,000 of them anyway. I mean, look at the British Empire. It's so vast, we can somewhat assimilate these guys quick. And that was the next phase of the education, because they started schools in 1813. There was a government school, a proper government school started, with a very bright William Robertson as a teacher. And that school sort of faltered along. It continued for about 50, 60 years, up to 1960. There were 4 teachers. It was William Robertson from Scotland. It was Robert Blair from Scotland. And there was a Stewart guy, and eventually there was a Bremner. Those were the 4 main teachers, but only them. And if you look at the numbers in 1810, there were about by estimate, 3,400 child or school-going children, or children of school-going age in the Gaffanet district. And there was only 100 at school. So out of 3,400 kids, only 100 had the benefit of schooling. And even that schooling was sort of dicey at times because of lack of proper teachers and so forth. But we don't want to talk about that much. It's just to tell you that all those efforts really died. And the resistance or the reasons for the failure was, firstly, English was a problem. English was, at one point, 1822, they said, only English, nothing else. So many parents who would have sent, Afrikaans parents or Dutch parents, who would have sent their kids to school, then out of rebelliously decided, no, they're not going to school at all, if they're not teaching any Dutch at all. They eventually brought Dutch back by about 1834, 1835, as a medium of teachers, but there were really no teachers as well. That's the other reason. There was a real shortage of teachers, all languages, English as well as Dutch. There were schoolmeesters, but they were mostly either a drunk sailor or a drunk government official or a drunk soldier or something that just sort of hopped from farm to farm and got very, very dicey education, which they offered. It got so bad by about 1855, the government said, Speciale Commissie van Onderzoek, a commission of inquiry into the educational mess of Graaff-Reinet. That had better words than that, but that's what it boiled down to. And that thing started to stir then. So let's then start with, let's say that was before the Graaff-Reinet College for Boys. Their start we can trace back to about 1858, when a few people came together in town. Very nice group. It was a magistrate, Beranger. It was the doctor, Marsdorp. It was the dominee, Murray. It was Ziervogel. He was our first member of the Legislative Assembly or Parliament at that time. The sort of senior people in town came together and said, we have to do something. And in 1858, a bill passed Parliament in Cape Town to sanction the formation of a proper school in Graaff-Reinet. To be modeled after the South African College, but specifically after Grey College in Port Elizabeth, which was, I think, sanctioned about 2 years before that. So we can say that was, let's say, the conceptual birth of the place. Very quickly, they formed a council. In 1860, they had a council meeting, and there was a lot of fundraising in town. They accumulated £5,000 in almost no time, because if they got to 5,000, the government said, we'll chip in 400. That's a lot of work to do for 400 if you have to raise your own 5,000, but nevertheless, the sentiment in the town was all, oh, yes, let's get the school and make it proper and good. They were so keen to get started that they actually started to teach without teachers. They opened the school in 1860, somewhere late in 1860. The first two guys that got credit there for teaching was, I think it was a Mr. Twig and a Mr. Tweed and some other funny name. The one was a government official and the other one has no traceable origin. So they were not real teachers, but at least they started the school. But the council immediately scouted for good staff. So they said, we want 2 professors, because at the time the idea was, like Grey College and the South African College, they would offer the whole shebang all the way up to, let's say, university level. We didn't use those terms then, but tertiary education, call it tertiary education. So they called for applications, and they got 11 applications, all from South African people. And they said, no, not good enough. We need something better. So they then fingered somebody in Scotland to say, recruit some people for us. And they came up with 2 guys who then said, yes, we'll come. The one was Professor Francis Guthrie, and the other one was Professor James Gill. Now, that Gill is very often confused with a Dr. Gill of Somerset East. He also did wonderful educational stuff, but Somerset East Gill is not Graaff-Reinet Gill. It's 2 different people. They're not even related, I think. They only arrived a year later. So the first year of the Graaff-Reinet College for Boys, which they actually call the Athenaeum, but that name, fortunately, never stuck. It sounds very presumptuous to call a dusty Karoo town to have an Athenaeum. But anyway. So in about September 1861, the 2 professors arrived, and they started to build a school. The school was officially inaugurated in 1861. Once the professors arrived, they actually got Andries Stockenstrom Andre Stockenstrom, who as a young person 40 years earlier, 45 years earlier, did wonderful things as a 25-year-old magistrate here in town. He was then sort of an elderly statesman. And they got him, and the whole inauguration ceremony was held in the Grootkerk. Of course, not this one, the previous version of the Grootkerk. And he made a very moving speech. Amongst other things, he had the foresight to say, what we are doing and what you are doing is absolutely wonderful. But remember, it's not enough, because there's a big part of the population that doesn't share that's either too far away on farms, or the concern of the parents aren't really there to send them to school. You don't have teachers. What about all the other kids? You're reaching some, that's good, but continue the quest. And that was taken very literally by Charles Murray, who then stepped in as the second minister, or not the second, actually the seventh minister of Gaffenet, but following his father. And Charles Murray immediately started to also form a little Afrikaans or Dutch school they called, eventually they call it the Brink School. Some of you may have heard the word before, the Brink School, named after a headmaster, Brink. But that was a little side story which we won't pursue now, but there wasn't a small Dutch school then, and the Gaffenet College for Boys. Just to say something briefly about these first two guys, that is Francis Guthrie. And what an amazing, I mean, I had another slide full of stuff that he did. But he was really one of the absolute pillars of Gaffenet. You know, he got involved in everything. He was at the church, at the hospital level, the library. He did scientific. He even pointed out the first railway routes around here. That was in 1860, way before they even thought of building the railway lines. He was such a polymath type. Those of you that have a mathematical interest, there's a famous problem in mathematics that was unsolved for many years until about 10 years ago. It's a 4-color map problem. I won't try and explain that, but he said you don't need more than 4 colors to colorize countries on a map that you won't have borders with the same color both sides of the border. In other words, no matter how you draw the map, you don't need more than 4 colors. Now think about it. You know, I think I can quickly draw something that needs more than 4. You try and do it at home tonight. You can't. But the point is, nobody could prove it. And Guthrie came up with that problem at the age of 17 years old. He was a student somewhere in Scotland, and he posted the problem. And he went to his professor, and he said, well, that's too difficult for me. And he posted it to the expert in England or Scotland, and he said, it's too difficult for me. It turned out to be too difficult for all the mathematicians of the world for about 150 years. Until they solved it in this century. But anyway, that's Francis Guthrie for you. A real, and in his time, and I wouldn't ascribe it all to him, but it so happened in that time, Gaffenet was prosperous. We had suddenly this influx of people and scholars and school. We had people like Harry Bolus, the famous botanist who later became famous. We had John Macleay, famous botanist who made gardens. He designed the Burgers Park in Pretoria, for example, for Paul Creer, called on him to come and do that for us. And there was an atmosphere in town where they had public lectures on astronomy. They had the musical society and bands and all sorts of stuff. It was really the golden era. If you want to call it the Athenaeum, maybe we could apply it to that particular phase. But that first 10 years, the school did really well. Under his guidance, and they did offer, you know, very high, to the highest level of education, but it worked such that you prepared the student, and then you had to write the exam of Cape Town, the South African college, and the Gaffenet students did exceptionally well. They were always, you know, one year I think the top guy was also a Maasdorp boy. He was the best in the Cape Colony, competing against hundreds of others. And in one year, I think more than half of the top, absolute top level, more than half of them were Gaffenetters. So the school did really well. They had really good people. The other guy, I don't have a picture of him, is James Gill. He was also an interesting guy, did many things also for the town, but he was not very tactful. He was quite rude. He was quite arrogant. He was good. And I'm not saying this in the same sentence, but he also lived in Adendorp. Okay? So it showed a streak of independence there. I live in Adendorp, not here. Okay, but let's move on. Sadly, about in 1870, 1865, the economy started to falter. Any of you have, all of you may have seen that, the book by Henning. He actually has a graph in it where he graphs the economic activity in town. And you will see Graaff-Reinet had a definite hump from about 40 to 1960, and then a deep dip, and then about in 1890 it picked up again. And then when that big dip hit, of course it also hit the school. Students dried up. Many of the farmers who used to put the kids in boarding school and stuff, either the farmers moved away completely or they just couldn't afford to put their kids into this then private, quite expensive school. They even cut the professor's salary. They had real difficulties. So they, when they cut the salaries in 1871, Guthrie decided, Gill was first to do it. Gill said, I'm out of it. And then about 5 years later, Guthrie also resigned. Both of them went on to become professors elsewhere. They had wonderful careers later on, which we won't get into now. So that was a sort of the start of a downhill slide. And eventually, to cut a long story short, about in 1884, it all came to an end, the university part. Then they said, we're going to reduce, you're going to make you a state school, and you're simply going to do up to matric level or the equivalent of matric those days, and that's it. So that higher education part fell away. And that's what I call the title was The Rise and the Fall. It's actually the rise and the fall of the tertiary educational part. And sadly, with that, of course, many other talented people had to leave town. After Guthrie and Gill left, they appointed no less than 5 other professors, but they didn't last long. I don't know who they are. There's no real record of them. Some of you may know the name Dahl. That's a better known one. He took over from Guthrie in 75. Eli, Lecornu, Bristow, and Liebman. They were all here for the next, let's say, 10 years. In that 10-year period, they sort of came and went, came and went, came and went. But they always apparently had 2. They had a professor of mathematics and science and a professor of the languages and the classics. So you can get an education then with just 2 professors. Now we need about 15, and I don't think the education is any better, by the way, but sorry, Bruce. You're still in the business, so I would say that loud. Okay. Just a quick sort of something in between. Don't think that that was the only school. Graaff-Reinet had an absolute ridiculous number of schools. At some point they counted them. I think in 1913 they counted 37. I think Minnaar in his book on Graaff-Reinet, he had another count somewhere in the 1880s or 1890s where he got up to like in the 40s. There were all sorts of schools. I mean, it was the ladies' seminary for music, and there was, the most famous one was also a guy in Adendorp, by the way, Samuel Godbolt. He had a commercial school, and his scholars became very well known because they could do excellent copper plate writing. He really, I think they could just write. I don't know what else they could do, but they could write beautifully. There are some samples of their writing reproduced in some of the historical sources. So there were many, many schools, but they were little schools and they never lasted. You know, it was literally 1 or 2 women or men would sort of set aside a little room in their house and take in 4 or 5 students for like 6 months or 2 years, and then it doesn't work. But they all had names, and they all put their names in the newspaper. This school is now opening and will offer the most wonderful education. Never happened really, at least, but there was some sentiment towards education which is important to us. On the Afrikaner side, briefly, because that's something that I'm looking at the moment, which is absolutely fascinating. The church, Charles Murray's church, which he started sort of after Andre Stockenstrom said, you guys do something for the Afrikaner side of or the Dutch side of the community. They continued, but by about 1896, 1898, there was so much poverty that they actually started boarding schools, but they were boarding schools, not boarding you pay. It's like a schools, boarding houses for indigent children, people who simply had no parents, or the parents couldn't look after them, or the social workers in those days, there were no social workers. It was actually the predicant or the police sergeant. In some of the small towns I see in the literature, the police sergeant had to assess the house and decide whether you are okay to look after this kid, and if he doesn't agree, they take the kid. So they all ended up in Graaff-Reinet. At some point from about 18, let's say from the Boer War roughly until 1925, there was something like 6 homes for indigent children in Graaff-Reinet. One in Adendorp, well, 3 for boys, 3 for girls, but that's another fascinating topic. Just to say there were lots of other things, other moving parts, as they say in modern language as well. Okay. Let's move a little bit further along the line. The Cape Colony was blessed by 3 exceptional superintendents or superintendent generals, I think the title changed over the years, of education in the Cape Colony. The first one was Rose Innes. Some of you may recognize the name, possibly. He started in Uitenhage. He was never a teacher here. He started in Uitenhage, but he became a major force after his work in Uitenhage, where he started Muir College. He went to become the superintendent general. Then there was Langham, Dale Langham, I think was the name. Langham took over from him. He also did his bit. And then he was taken over by another Scot in about 1890 or so, Thomas Muir, after whom Muir College in Uitenhage is mentioned. And Muir had a legacy amongst other things. He was also, by the way, a very accomplished mathematician. But Muir left a legacy of building proper schools. Wherever you come in the Cape Colony, you will be hard-pressed not to find the school. Oudtshoorn, Prieska, Kennard, Graaff-Reinet, Uitenhage, Grahamstown, Hilltown, Doon, there up at Cathcart, all these places, they just built schools. Because he said you start proper schooling with a proper building. You can't have the one without the other. So under the stewardship of Thomas Muir, 2 important things, buildings were built in Graaff-Reinet. Oh, before we get there, sorry, let me interrupt myself. There's some snippets here of students and teachers of the Graaff-Reinet College. The guy in the center there, this guy with a hat on, looks like a hat or a cap. That is Mr. W.A. Wall. We'll get to him in a second, we'll say more. And that's the matric class of 1904. And there are the names, that's the back side of that picture, and I transcribed the names, and you can have a brief look at those names. I'm sure some of you will recognize not only your name, but most possibly an Oupa Grootjie or something that it could have been. I'm in your way, sorry guys, you must just shout me to the side here. Interesting, if you buy the names, they were as Afrikaans as they were English. And who's Wie de la Harp? That's I thought somebody of yours, de la Harps? Okay. He's a principal or headmaster W.A. Way again with the cricket team. That we're not sure when it was taken, but we know that Wall left in 1910. So it must have been before 1910 because that's a schools team. And he started in 1897, I think. His tenure was 1897 until 1910, so it must have been in that period. Let's just have from those 2 pictures, this is W.A. Wall, very attractive guy, but he's also, like Guthrie before him, 50 years before him, he was a real pillar of the community. Besides his role as a very successful and a good principal, and that is, everybody concurred with that. He was, under his stewardship, the school really went better than it ever was before. He left, for example, 2 legacies here in town, which we can still see. The one is the building where the police college is now. We'll explain that a little bit better. But that building was built in 1906. It was inaugurated in 1906. In 1903, Thomas Muir, the Superintendent General, laid the foundation stone. In 1906, he actually inaugurated the building. And that was because of this guy pushing and fighting for a proper school. So that building was built then for the Gaffernet College for Boys. Where were they before that? When they started in 1860, they went somewhere in Somerset Street. No idea where. There's no clues as to where it were. But they bought a building today where the provincial building is next to the Windmill Junction. That building, they bought it from Mr. Meintjes, I think, the house, and they built a school there, and that was the school of the Gaffernet College Boys for about 40 years, until they moved over to across the river to the building that W. Way organized. So that's one very visible thing that he did. He was also a great sportsman. In just about all the sports you can find his face in the pictures. He was also in the theater company, he acted in the plays. I mean, he was also a very, very visible and a very strong leader in the community. Through his, and he's specifically credited for that, he arranged or he pushed for that Gaffernet must have a proper sports ground. Now that thing you see in the back there, the top sort of middle, slightly to the left, that circle there, that was the sports ground. Now, where's that today? Just behind the sports ground, you'll see the railway line running around. In the foreground, you can see the railway bridge here near the jail. On the right-hand side, in the center of the picture, the white building, that's the jail. And in the far background, on the very right-hand side, you can see the old station. So it's all in that area. So there, through his, specifically him pushing, they built that oval or sports ground. It also became a showground at some other times, multi-purpose area. Here's a picture again of Mr. Way with the white blazer in the middle, somewhere in the middle line in the middle. And at the top it says there, which I'm assuming to be the Gaffernet and District Country Club. Now that little pavilion is actually in that grounds, and that is where the people sat. And apparently, I believe from Rob Hobson, was that where the golf club also had its clubhouse, and all sorts of things happened there as a nucleus for all the sports activities, like Botanics later years became for Gaffernet. All thanks to Mr. Way. Not only Mr. Way, but you need a leader somewhere. This is the matric class of 1912. By this time, Way had left. So the guy on the bottom row, the second guy from the left, that was Mr. Somerville. He was the successor. I believe there was a Mr. Meller for a very short period, but that must have been a caretaker position. The proper principal headmaster after Way was Mr. Somerville, and there he sits with his big moustache next to the tall guy in the center. 1912, and once again we have names. Can you read that? Is it big enough? Once again, a good mix tussen die Van der Bergs and the Du Plessis and the Adendorfs, the Lootse, then to the Raymonds and the Woolers and the Bedfords and all the others. Very healthy mix of Gaffernet boys. Another school picture, that's the second team soccer. I'm just going to read the names starting on the left here. Roughly it's Coetzee, Marie, Smith, Crawford, Vermaak, Pritchard, Spence, Tron, Wooler, Visser, and Greef. This guy on the very right on the middle row, it's a Greef. It's possibly related to Peter Greef. I'll ask him when I see him again. You possibly know Peter Greef. His mom ran the tuck shop at Union High, I believe, for many years. They just lived across the road. And these were the headmasters of the Gaffernet College for Boys. Guthrie, we talked about. Dahl took over when after Guthrie left. There was a Mr. Presley and a Mr. LaRue. I'm not sure when that baton were handed over between the two. It's one date I'm still missing. And then Mr. Way, Mr. Somerville. And Somerville left, we'll talk about that soon. And then for 2 years, the Reverend Taylor, I'm not sure which church denomination he was. It wasn't Anglican as far as I could work out. Must have been some other denomination. He was a caretaker principal for 2 years. And then Dr. Abers took over in 1990 to 1921, and we'll get to him in a second. Okay, another small interruption. but that's a big story all on its own, maybe like this one. And that's the Midlands Seminary, Midlands Ladies Seminary. We had now the boys were taken care of in a reasonable fashion from about the mid-1860s, 1860s. The Afrikaner people were taken sort of care of through a little school. What about the girls? At that time, the successors became known of the American ladies' seminaries in Massachusetts, Holyoke, Mount Holyoke, and all these places. And word got to Dr. Murray, Charles Murray, and he said, why don't we also do something specifically modeled after that for our girls? And that led to the Midlands Ladies Seminary. Originally, they had recruited 2 of these American girls to come and open the school. And Helen Murray, the daughter of Andrew Murray, was there in a sort of a teacher. But I think they were also, it took a year of them to come here, and then Helen Murray sort of acted. And when they left a few years later, she took over and she became the famous Helen Murray of the Midlands Ladies Seminary. Just to also recognize their very important role, as you will see soon in a few slides. Now, back to Thomas Muir. Thomas Muir with his building of schools. Yeah, 2 schools in Gaffernet came during his tenure. The first one is the Midlands Ladies Seminary. Now, where did they go? They had their school where Edenhof is today. That corner plot there, just opposite Brighton Keep. That was not that building. That was the old school building. My own mother was actually a student here at college, and that was a women's hostel at the time, and it was broken down in her time. But then in 1911, finally this building was opened. And this is actually the building of Volkschool today, Laer Volkschool. That's that building. And that was built in Somerset Street. So that has been from 1911, that was the school of the Midlands Seminary, Ladies Seminary, and it's a Thomas Muir school as well. I already talked about the college for boys. This one, we're not sure when this picture was taken. This was opened in 1906. Okay, let's get to the last chapter of this talk, and that's a messy one. A lot of things happened that really turned once again, like it was in the 1850s, that turned the whole educational scene in Gaffernet on its head. So you must be patient. I'm going to give you a complicated slide. Don't worry, the next one is going to be more complicated. So just look at this one first. And this is very, very much summarized, abbreviated. There's lots more to the story, but this is the main storyline. Look at the top left, the Gaffernet, Gaffernet College for Boys. We followed its story all the way up to where there's a fork in the road. We're not going there yet, but that went on by itself. The Midlands Ladies Seminary, in 1917, they split into 2. They split into a teacher's college and into just a normal school for girls. Now, that is not some abrupt thing. That has been actually simmering all the time, because as early as 1880, Helen Murray and the American teachers realized that we can't really do much about education in this country if we don't train teachers. That's one of the first things you need, is a good teacher. Then you think about a building, and then you think about kids, and then you're going to start doing schooling. So they have, since 1880, they've been quietly training a few girls, selected, I guess, the better girls, or after they graduated, they kept on teaching them as teachers, and they used them, sort of hands-on practical teacher training. And those numbers grew quite significantly. You know, they had like 20, 30 of them, until there was enough of them, a critical mass, that they said, you know, we can stand on your own legs now. Let's just simplify things. Let the teachers' training go on, because that's important, and let the school go on, that's important, but let's part our ways. But there was no acrimony or problems with that. It was just a natural evolutionary thing. And therefore, the teacher college split down. That was in 1917. Okay? So that's the first fork in the road. At about the same time, another really important thing happened, and it didn't happen in it didn't happen in Graaff-Reinet. It happened in the Cape. It happened in South Africa. They brought in a law in 1960 to say that every child, and this may sound familiar to us, every child is entitled to be schooled in his home language. Okay, that meant if you go to a school and you want to be schooled in your home language and you happen to speak Dutch, then you can insist on that. And that's what people started doing. And this was a big problem for the established, by then fully English-speaking schools. In the Midlands College, the boys' college and the girls' seminary, they were fully English. Not at that time, sorry, let me go back. After about 1900, there was some Dutch, but it was as a Dutch, it was a language class, not a medium of instruction for all the other subjects. It was just the language you could do, like we did a little bit of German at school and you did Latin and all this sort of stuff. Similar sort of model. So Helen Murray resigned, but that was not, some claim it was because of the language. There was also then a rebalancing of funds because there was now suddenly more state schools teaching Dutch or had to teach Dutch. More funds were, the split between the schools, amongst the schools, changed a little bit. She wasn't happy. I think it was a time for retirement anyway. So she retired, and Mr. Somerville at the Boys' College also retired. And he said it had all to do with the language. I don't think he could speak any, or he's probably an honorable thing to do. He could not, he was not master of the language. That's what I read between the lines. Nevertheless, the language thing came in, and that caused a big rift. And for about a year or two, while the Reverend Taylor was still in charge, not much happened. People were grumbling, but they continued the way they had to. And there was some Dutch then also taught in the College for Boys. But then the next thing happened. The headmaster changed from after Reverend Taylor, Dr. Eybers became headmaster. And Eybers said, if we have to teach Dutch, that's not the proper language to teach. I'm looking at my constituency and the boys, they're Afrikaans, they're not Dutch. So he said, let's, instead of Dutch, change it to English, change it to Afrikaans rather than Dutch. Now that, of course, was a bone of contention amongst the Afrikaans people. But more surprisingly to me, it was a major bone of contention for the English-speaking community. But I think it was that was the last straw. Because when that happened, a whole bunch of the college boys, parents actually took their kids out and they'd say, we can't deal with this anymore. Afrikaans, we will not tolerate. And they went to form a private school set up in the St. James Hall, also just up the road. Famous to show up this way. Everything happened here. In the St. James Hall then, there was a small private school. It started as a small school, but very soon their numbers were so large that they had classes apparently a few places in town. So that was a sort of an ugly sort of split. And by 1921, many of the English-speaking people said, but we don't want to be a private school. We insist on having a state school. Why must we pay all this money and we want to be a state school? So there was a little bit of a split in the English school at St. James then. And some of them supported continuing St. James, and some of them said no. They went to the government and said, no, you must help us to have an English school. It became such a mess that once again the government had to step in. Like they sent a special mission of inquiry in, what is it, 1855 somewhere. Once again, the Superintendent General, by that time a guy with the name of Viljoen, he came with a whole delegation of experts to Graaff-Reinet to sort out the mess. Because you can see there are so many players. And they were here for, I don't know, I haven't checked, but possibly for a few months, consulting and thinking, and everybody's angry and shouting. And eventually they came up with this model. They said, okay, the Graaff-Reinet School for Boys, as it then was, remained after the others left, and the Midland Seminary for Girls, they will amalgamate and they will form Volksskool. It's sort of strange that two English threads become an Afrikaans school. St. James Private School and the Gaffenets, because they had lots of students in Klammering, and they made it a state school essentially, but in making it a state school, they became Union High. So Union High today starts out at St. James. The Teachers Training College remained a training college, because it was already, since 1917, it was on its own. So after this whole reorganization, by the end of 1921, that was the scenario. Union High, Volkschool, Training College, the three legs. And I must say, I'm quite impressed, because that was little bit more than 100 years ago. And ever since, it's been remarkably peaceful. I mean, not anything like it used to be. And I think that is one of the reasons why Tertia and I came to Gaffenet, is because our perception was there's a relatively easy and a nice balance amongst the different language groups, in Afrikaans and English in this case. And it still is today. And maybe that's the wisdom of our forefathers then, that actually did the right thing. It was a difficult thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. Just the final slide, and this is the last one, which is more complicated. Same slide as just now, but just to talk about the buildings very briefly. Let's start at the bottom. There's a line of 5 different properties. Okay? The Gleblands at the time of the reorganization was an empty space there where the Anglican Cemetery and where Union High is today. It was actually municipal land at that time. And there were negotiations on the way for the Teachers Training College. Remember, the Teachers Training College they were then stuck there where the provincial building is today. The building that was left by the Gaffenet School for Boys, they then took over that old, it was then a very old building. And they wanted to also build a proper college. So they negotiated with the municipality, can we get the Gleblands? So that was almost a done deal. But then this reorganization came, and Viljoen and his crowd said, with, of course, the blessing of the community, municipality, don't give it to the college, give it to Union High. They can build their own school there. Which they then, and they got it very quickly in 1926. The first buildings were already inaugurated. So the government in this case moved quite quickly then to get the Gleblands into Union High hands and to build them a proper school, the one we see today to a large extent still. So that was the Gleblands. The Somerset Street property, that is the one where the nice building was built by Thomas Muir. It used to be the Midland Seminary. That building became then the home of the Volkschool. That's the red block. So Volkschool ended up in there, and that was the Volkschool. I know my father was in matric in that school. I think you guys would know the higher upper Volkschool, it was only built after the fire, wasn't it? Something like that. You guys would know. Okay, the next one was the Burke Street. That is the provincial property. The Burke Street property, that used to be the Gaffenet College for Boys at the top left. When they found their new building, it became the Teachers Training College. And that's where it stopped. And afterwards, I don't know where that building went, but it's actually demolished today. There's another building. The next building is in College Road. That's the police are now. That was the Gaffenet College for Boys, and that got handed over to the training college. So you guys go to the training college, and the St. James Hall, I think nobody would be more relieved than the vicar or whatever his proper title is, the Anglican pastor, to get his school hall back after all these noisy kids and teachers probably overcrowded that building tremendously. But I'm running out of time. You had a list. Where are you? You had a list. Maybe you can tell the story.
He says he started his schooling at Rooiberg on his 4th birthday. Our first governess was Mrs. Maud, who later set up a co-educational school on the corner of Burke and Somerset Street, where Onze Courant was once housed. From there she moved the double-story house at the top of Church Square and on the corner of Van Ryneveld Square. Here many well-known Gaffeneters received their education. I was personally taught by Mrs. Oret. I was never a student at Mr. Godbard's school. This was before my time. I always heard you could tell a God-called pupil by his handwriting. I believe he started his school at Knoffelfontein, subsequently part of Gallen. The only Graaff-Reinetters that I know who attended his school were Archie McNaughton and Joe Kroon. To return to the Oret School, this was established where Dr. Nordie lives today. Many well-known Graaff-Reinetters can trace their early education to these pioneer pedagogues. The Mrs. Mimmy, Katie and Kitty, the latter was a kindergarten teacher. They were famous for their ability to impart the 3 R's. At the age of 10, in 1891, I went to the Graaff-Reinet College, then under the principalship of Mr. LaRue. This was in Bird Street, where the Union High originally started. I boarded with my Aunt Chrissy, Mrs. George Watermeadow, at first, and then went as a boarder to a recognized boarding house which stood on the present site of the Nieuwe Kerk. When I was a boarder, Mr. Miles was the principal of the Graaff-Reinet College. Some well-known scholars, and this is what really interested me because it just shows how little has changed in our time. Some well-known scholars during my time were the Marsdorfs, Willie, Gerard, Ubi, Ernest, Louis, and Herman. There were Pauls, Retiefs, Kingwills, P.J. Slobbert, Joe Kroon, Arthur Hobson, Henry Nordie, Henry Stanford, the Toys, Raymond, Charlie, and Clarence, Willie Crawford, Wally Gilbert and Fred Probart, Harry and Cameron Beard, Harry Bunton, Mr. Fick, the Miller, Charles Goodhouse, Henry Foster, Billy LaRue, Jamie and Robbie Murray, Jim Robbie and Archie Lukoff, Frank Murray, Emil Barman, Fritz and George, Willie, and Wally Wilson.
There's no better way to end this than that. Thank you so much for that.